All right, Chapter 2, Design and Inspection Responsibility. 2.1, Designer's Responsibility. The most specified of the base metal structure according with the design information specification welding process for the filler metals is selected by the fabricator or in some cases specified by the design office to fit the materials requirement. These items should be included with the specification indication for the drawing. Joint design must be shown with the drawings by standard welding symbols, detailed drawings and welded joints. B. The designer must determine the welding requirements, must develop the selected appropriate welding sections of the contract for each of the projections. The decision are made with the instruction from the use of the agency. The designer must develop the contract specifications that ensure the contract known as the welding quality that must be maintained. The designer using the following criteria to determine the required degree of the control over the welding quality. 1. Strict control over the welding procedure. Operation is required with the 5 cases listed in order of the increase importance. Distress in one member could cause the release of the partial collapse of the failure with some hazard to the life of the property. Application of the design load may be approximately approach 10,000 cycles over many years. Some of the welding required structural integrity, high stress. The application of the design load may exceed 10,000 cycles over many years. C. Empirical design requirements compensate for the overloads, abuse, and mishandling acts with God and similar hazards. Application of the design load may be on order for over 100,000 cycles. Failure of the welds components shall be in satisfactory structure with the bridges and high pressure gas building system. Fatigue of the materials must be carefully considered for the application for the design load in order for the 2 million cycles. Application requires the highest quality of the material workmanship throughout such a for nuclear space ballistic application for the system subjected to the hazardous chemicals, extreme pressures and temperature. 2. Less control over the welding procedures and operation is needed where A. Stress levels are low. B. The welds are subjected occasionally to the design load. C. The structure is composed of multiple components. Distress in one member will cause the inconvenience rather than collapse or the catastrophic failure. C. The design must establish an inspection procedure needed to determine the weld quality. The designer must be familiar with the destructive and non-destructive methods of evaluating welding quality. Must know the capabilities, limitation, procedure for the qualifying inspector must be specified. D. The designer must establish acceptance requirement. The welding joints must identify with the applicable military standard specification code for the meeting of these requirements. When the standards and codes to other specifications are cited, the contract specification must list the paragraphs and part of the publication which are applicable to exclude. The designer must be used only the most recent code specifications. C. The designer must indicate that the plan specification extent of the inspection testing required for the various application conditions. Though the inspection testing needed, but depending on primarily the design requirements, the following general guidelines should be considered. 1. The applying the value engineer. In short, do not specify unnecessary testing. 2. Follow the design criteria codes for the specified extent inspection testing required for the relatively work stress and the joint efficiency and conditions of use. 3. Inspection visually non-critical applications condition very little other than testing should be required. 4. Define the critical joints for the weld to choose to be tested. The critical of each of the welds should determine the extent of the non-destructive and destructive tests. These tests are supplement for the quality provided with the qualified procedure. Qualified welders operated the visual inspection of the weld can be critical because of the high strength for the impact, vibration, temperature, high safe insurance against the operational failure and hard to weld material. A combination of these factors in multi-story offices or warehouse buildings with structural steel framing, for example, the testing would be done mainly with the high stress joints and critical piping system. However, all the either joints would be non-destructive tested uniformly applied with the random test procedure would be used. 5. Determining the extent of the random test in piping tanks and other elements that have uniform joints at the design level. The number can be expressed by the percentage of all the welds in the system coupled with the finite test of increment. However, the extent of the random test of the large steel structure vary with welds and wildly varying design. Stressing should not be expressed in this way. The designer is responsible for specifying the appropriate air test of the critical and non-critical welds to ensure the clarity of the binding inspection documentation from the location numbers and minimum increment length of the random test should be clearly outlined. After the designer must indicate the specification what to do and when the welds fail to meet the acceptance requirement. The designer must design the weld so that the operator can reach the welding joint easily. If the joint is located so that the welder cannot observe the welding operation easily, position the welding gun or electrode properly. A poor weld may result in such cases it may be hard and impossible to repair welding defects. 1. The dimension shape of the joint surface should allow the weld to penetrate with the joint fully, and the difference between the thicknesses are joined, and edge of the thicker piece of it should be tapered, and the thickness of the thinner piece with the tapered transition must come from the requirements of the following publications as applicable: American Welding Society D11, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code, Section 3 and Section 8. The American National Institute and Standard B31-1. Good joint design practice vessels are shown in Section 8 of the ASME Boiler Pressure Vessel Codes and the Piping System Appendix D of the American National Standard Institute B31-1. The structural work of the American Institute of Steel Construction's ASIC Manual of Steel Construction and American Welding Society D11. In some welding operations, some type of the welding joints is used to support the molten welding, prevented with excessive penetration with the backing strips. When used, must be the material and similar with the base metal, with the penetrate with the weld, non-consumable black rings, and piping systems should not be permitted unless absolutely necessary. Instead, the penetration can be controlled by altering the joint design increasingly with the root face, decreasing the root opening, using the consumable insert rings. For if the joint is to weld both sides with the reverse of the root pass, the side of the opposite in which the weld is deposited should be chipped or ground with the ground gouged out into sound metal before the welding is done with the second side. The operation to prevent lacking the fusion of the root with the joint, the reverse side of the V-weld joint may be the ground out with the re-weld to improve the contour. Complete the penetration groove of the welds or must be welded through the both sides of the unless improper backup of the plates used. 8. The designer must decide which of the welds are to be painted, which are not, to indicate them on the drawings. Painting of the weld machine working metals are by hammer bolts. The technical use of the reducing distortion residual stress and caused by the shrinkage of the welded metal is cool. However, the technique can be harmful in extreme care. It is not used in some it can cause cracking, overlapping the other defects. Painting is permitted on the surface of pass for the welding joints immediately and passing through the paint only for the contractor's office or permission. Painting of stainless steel welds is not permitted because of it can cause handling of the hardening of the weld metal and should be taken to prevent painting and slag and removed from the surface of pass with the chipping hammers. The designer must determine the shape of the weld surface, the height of the base metal, the reinforcement, the importance indicated by the shape of the drawings, and an abrupt change of the contour between the welded surface and the base metal may result in the stress concentration high enough to cause the failure to under surface loading. Therefore, the weld surface bending smoothly in the surface base metal and necessary edge of the weld should be grounded to achieve the smooth bend of the surface. Undercut the edge of the weld and can be repaired with the grinding of the depth of the undercut, but it does not exceed 1 1/16 of an inch. Undercut is deeper than 1 1/16 of an inch. It should be repaired and adding welding metal area with the grinding of the surface of the smooth, even contour. Grinding also should be used to remove the overlapping the weld edge and the abrupt ridge of the value of the welded surface. The maximum amount of the welding reinforcement should be 1/32 to 1/8 of an inch. Alright, 2.2 Contractor. The contractor must develop the qualified welding procedures provided with the qualified welders and welding operators procedures satisfactory weldment. The construction drawing specification ordinarily indicate the location of the weld joints and type of the joints required for the contractor must handle the details preceding the weld. For example, the requirements used, number of the passes, the choice of the electrode, the welding process. Therefore, the contractor must understand the objective of the plan, the necessary sequence for the contracting officer with the welding and engineer metallurgist assigned with the project. The concern should be meet the discuss and status for the welding program and the work progress. All welding procedures used for any of the applications covered with the manual. All welders and welder operators assigned with these construction operations must be qualified by the production welding has begun. The contractor must conduct all the qualification testing, maintain records shown with the testing procedure used, the result of which the test. The records must also be available to the inspector, contractor's office, the representation. The contractor must make sure that the welding equipment is serviced and maintained normally to reduce the required current with the output and the voltage control, filler wire feed for automatic and semi-automatic process storage, handling of the flux, and coating with electrodes must also be done properly. 1. Flux must be kept off the dirt and metal scale of the other foreign materials. Flux used during the previous welding operation should not be reused if there is any oil moisture from the flux where during the welding of the quality submerged area of the welding metal and comparable to the obtained with low hydrogen electrodes. Packaged flux must be stored with a warm day room. Loose flux stored in open containers that should be subject to the same drying conditions as the low hydrogen electrodes. Excessive moisture in electrode coatings, the relief of the hydrogen during welding and procedure with the adverse effect for the quality of the weld. Since this moisture meets the absorbed from the atmosphere of the packaging electrode, it should be stored within the dry, warm room. Loose electrode should be stored in the dry bins, holding over the cap of the manufacturer's recommendation temperature. With low hydrogen electrodes with the coating have the hydrogen procedure with the constitution, spatial care of the taking the manufacturer packaging the electrodes to make it a low content free combined moisture. If the electrodes absorb much moisture from the atmosphere, they are no longer functioning with a low hydrogen electrode. The rate of the moisture absorption depends on the coating of the compensation relative to the humidity. B. The electrode manufacturer should be asked for the recommendation for the bake time and the holding over the temperature, the maximum allowable exposure to the time with the particular electrode type, quality of the welds required relative to the humidity. If the information is unavailable, the general rules limit atmosphere exposure for the 4 hours of the electrode, remove the baking of the hold ovens, and hermetically sealed metal containers. If the critical welding application or when the relative humidity is 75% or higher, the exposure time may have to reach at little of 1.5 an hour. The electrodes which have been wet must not be used. The contractor may ensure that the tack welding and the jigging is done properly. The parts of the weld must be held within position before, during, and after the welding to keep them correctly aligned to minimize the distortion caused by the shrinking of the welded metal. Is the tools to do this. The tacking welding is frequently used either alone with the supplement various jigs, fixtures, and clamps. Tack welds which are subject to the cracking if they are too small and so it can be so source that defective subsequent welds are made. Therefore, the tack welds should always be inspected if in the cracked ground for the other subsequent welding. Some tacks, sound tack welds should be grounded to the smoother contour blends, and even into the base metal, which actually eases the completing of the metal with the tack weld and subsequent weld. Before welding has begun, the pieces that should be aligned with the afterward and abutting the edges of the part within the other tolerances specified with the contract. The contractor must take the precautions against either weather conditions. Welding should not be done if the surfaces are wet or covered with snow, ice, or frost. Local preheating of the joint area can be only used to dry the joint surface area. A joint in snow is following the joint will have the sheltered and so that the area will stay dry and during the weld. Welding will not be done in windy, drafty locations unless certain of the protective skins are used. In most arc welding processes incorporated the shield over the gas vaporized electrode coating and protecting the arc metal, molten welding metal, and from the air. If the welding is done with the windy or the draft location, the shield can be blown anyway with unsatisfactory welds will result. Welding should not be done if the temperature of the weld is below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. If the temperature is between 0 to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the joint area should be preheated to 70 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the weld, kept at a temperature throughout the welding operation. While preheating the structural steel must also conform with the American Welding Society D11. The contractor must ensure that the proper repair welding. Defective welds must be repaired, removing the defects of the welding joint and re-welding the joints. Defective may be removed mechanically by grounding, chipping, machining, or by arc flame of the gouging. Combination of the methods is often required. For example, the defects are removed with the flame of the gouging. The cut surface may need to be cleaned mechanically and smoothed before the repair weld is made. Flame and arc cutting surfaces, stainless steel. The nick steels have the heavy scale oxidizing coat, but must remove before the weld is kept from affecting the quality of the repair weld. Also, the heat with the gauging operation can affect the strength because of the metal exchange with the weld metal adjacent with the cut surfaces. Therefore, an additional 1/8 of an inch metal should be mechanically removed from these cut surfaces. Defects of aluminum alloys must be removed only by mechanical means. Extra care must be used with removing the crack welds. Non-destructive inspection may indicate that the true length of the crack, which may be too narrow to detect the test method being used. So one should remove not only the weld metal in the crack, but also some of the sound metal at each end of the crack. The amount removed from the maybe twice the base metal thickness or 2 inches, whichever is less, or each end of the crack. After the metal is taken out before the repairs, the weld should be inspected again to ensure that the full length of the crack has been removed. For repair, welding must be done with qualified welding using qualified welding procedures. The repair working might be easier with a smaller diameter electrode filler wire than was used to make the original weld. F. On critical welds, when requested by the inspectors in the contracting office, the contractor must have the welder and the welding operator apply with the predetermined identification mark of the complete weld joint. This mark is normally made with the base metal, but the next of the weld metal material may be marked by any method acceptable to the inspector as long as it does not cause notches or sharp discontinuities that could fail unsurface loading. The identified marks must remain legible until acceptance for the welding materials, the structure in which the weld is contained. The request of the welder should apply the mark and will remain legally legible for the life of the structure. G. The contractor must set up the procedure preheating, post-heating, stress relieving, and the conditions which the welding is exposed during the surface operation. Determine the thermal treatment necessary for the provided with the coverage of the thermal treatment. That is the American Welding Society Welding Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals of Welding. Since the preheating of the post-welding heat treatment, effective physical properties of the weld procedure must be set upon detailed contract with the fabricator, included with the welding procedure qualification. Preheating the application of the heating of the base metal before the welding and the cutting. Preheating must be used during the welding to complete here to help complete the welding joint. The need for temperature of the preheating depends on several factors such as chemical analysis, material, degree of restraint of the parts with it being joined, physical properties of the elements, temperatures, material thickness, and ambient temperature. A. Preheating may be required but recommended with welding performed under the codes of specifications such as the American Welding Society, Air Society Mechanical Engineers, and the American Petroleum Institute. However, the petroleum preheating does not necessarily assure the satisfactory completion of the welding joint. Requirements must be suited to individual materials, and applications. One, preheating may vary from the temperature, which is warm to the touch of the hand with the welding outdoors in the winter is to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit when the welding highly hardened seals. When the ambient temperature is less than 32 degrees Fahrenheit, local preheat of the welding joint are 700 degrees Fahrenheit is recommended. Post-welded heat treatment of the post-heating is a general type of the term covering the treatments during the welding to restore properties of the base metal and to reduce the desired microstructure in the base of the filler metals. Post-welding heating the treatment may require the normalization, full annealing, quenching of the temperature in solution of the precipitation treatments. Stress relief of the treatment is uniformly heating with the structure of the part of the temperature with the critical range of the high enough to relieve the moist of the residual stress that follow with the unique cooling. Stress relieving should not be confused with the other post-welding heat treatment processes, which may or may not prevent the need for the stress relieving depending on the maximum temperature attained with the post-weld heat treatment, the rate of the cooling for this temperature. 2.3 Inspection requirements. Inspection is done to meet the contract quality specification maintained with the quality control of the welding operation. Effective inspection requires the cooperation between the welder and welder operator. Inspectors should always encourage the welder or welder operator to check their own work and to repeat the questionable welding procedure. That must also be a mutual understanding between the contractor and the government supervisor personnel. Inspection costs money. Good inspection often saves more than it costs, reducing expensive time consuming the rejects, repair, detecting properly unsatisfactory welding procedures, and poor workmanship. Most inspections are done to the contractor fabricator since they will gain lose from the quality of the product. They can also mediate the corrective action, effective weldments, or allow the contractor to do their own inspection. The inspection personnel should be organizationally separate from the production personnel. Inspection personnel should be answered not to the project superintendent, but to the quality control element of the organization. Contractors may employ independent commercial inspection testing laboratories to perform these services, especially with the contractor production quality requirements vary widely. If the contractor is provided with reliable inspections, inspector government can simply with the spot check to make sure the inspection methods were adequate. Government inspection can be done either the government personnel and independent with the commercial inspection testing laboratory with the choice of depending on the number of the factors such as availability, qualified personnel, equipment, length of the project, cost of the inspection, the location of the project, critical inspection of the testing requirements. When qualified with the government personnel are available, they should be inspection and testing. This is desirable from the standpoints of administrative the control, maintenance of qualified government inspection personnel, personal interest of the quality of the product when the circumstances require work of the commercial laboratory. These inspectors act as agents for the government. The contractor's relationship. Designer, contractors, inspectors, welder operators should cooperate with the qualifying of the welding depending on largely with the skill of the contractor's personnel. The proper choice of the materials and adequacy of the welding procedure with the contractor depends on the inspector. The decision whether the complete welds are acceptable. 2. The inspector should develop a clear understanding of the specified requirements, interpret the contract provision consequently with it, and avoid either the favoring of the contractor making the unreasonable demands. Ensure that they should be absolutely fair to both the government and the contractor. Although the inspector usually makes the final decision about the quality of the weld, they should not take over the rule of the supervisor for the contractor, except for the weld should not be left with discretion, but be based on meeting the specified requirements. Competition of the competent contractor supervision should be provided to see that the welding procedures are being followed, but the requests being by the inspectors are carried out as much as possible. The inspector should ask the contractor supervisor or personnel to regulate the operation, should not give the orders directly to the workmen. 4. Thorough knowledge of the work is the best assurance of the satisfactory of the job. The good working relationship between the government and the contractor. The inexperienced inspector may unwittingly penalize both the contractor parties by unduly emphasizing the significant cost details of the work, imposing the needless hardship on the contractor with little benefit to the government. At the same time, the inspector may overlook other operations that may be vital and important to the job. For the example, the overemphasis of the strength of the welding when appearance is most important is vice versa. B. Inspection forces. On larger project with the government inspection welding operations assigned to the inspection section headed by the experienced supervisor. The differs isolated job of the welding, where inspection may be responsible for one or two individuals. On large project where the inspection of all the welds given with the specialized team. Assignments at early stage of the construction may be arranged for so that the inexperienced inspectors can watch the actions, decisions. Experienced personnel of the procedure will help to train the competent team that will operate efficiently with a later stage of work. The approach is not possible, however, on the small project with only one inspector, only the experienced construction personnel should be assigned in such a case. Inspector duty. The inspector must examine the details each of the phase welding operation must make the work is being done right. The inspection must observe the such of the requirements as procedure, welding qualification, joint design, preparation, alignment of electrode side, type of the welding equipment, technique. When the assignment is rotated, a new inspector must be learned about the procedures being followed with the status of the welding and inspection before assuming the inspection responsibility. Supervision. Good supervision. Inspectors important satisfactory welding operations on a large project. Even the most experienced inspectors do the little unless the project is instructed into the work. Given the full support with the dealings of the welding personnel, the supervisor must clarify the responsibility each for the part of the organization outside the limits for each of the inspector. The supervisor should tell the inspector about the decisions, acceptance requirements, and other issues. It's good supervisor practice circulate memorandums outlined with all project decisions made by those authority and summarizing material with the inspection. Inspectors can be still decided with some of the flexibility before the decisions are about the construction method. The opinions of the inspectors assigned into the work should be considered. Occasional meetings between the inspector and supervisor to discuss any of the job problems and practice requirements are helpful and often necessary. Chapter 3. Welding Processes.